Welcome to Imran's podcast. Today we have Craig. How do I pronounce your last name? Jeez.
Last name is Guarraci.
Guarraci. Craig Guarraci. He has worked at one of the coolest companies, at Microsoft, as well as Amazon, and he's also doing currently a tech product management career path for a lot of folks.
Yep.
And today's session of podcast is meant to be more informative for people who are trying to get into AI, product management, and all that other good stuff. Heavily on the AI side, though, because it's everywhere around us. But before we start on that, Craig, why don't you go ahead? Tell us a little bit about your background, how did you start into PM and also like AI product management?
Sure, sure. Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. So my background, and this kind of goes back to your podcast with Maria that you talked about doing work on the side. And I did that several times throughout my career, and it really helped me. So for example, way back in college when I was a junior and senior, I was writing code on the side to do applications, and I was having those applications distributed. I was able to talk about that in interviews that I had, and it was one of the things that helped me get hired at Microsoft as part of
Hmm.
my first job. I worked at Microsoft for 21 years as a full-timer. I had two different careers there. I also worked at Amazon for about 6.5 years. I worked at two different startups. One was fairly small, about maybe 20 or 30 people. The other had about 200 people.
Hmm.
And I've also done some charitable work along the way as well. So I gained some insight into the unique constraints that nonprofits also face. So one of my first jobs out of college was a technical position. It was a software design engineer and test. It was an SDET position, as it's called. And I was writing code in C, C++, and assembler, and in order to test compilers, assemblers, and runtime libraries. And also about that time, I genuinely wanted to own more of the product. I wanted to be more, understand more of the customer, what their pain points were, and actually to deliver, products and solutions for them. So I just started on the side doing that program management work, even though I had a full-time position at Microsoft. And that actually, that extra experience helped me to move into a program and product management position
Hmm.
at startups and other companies as well. So that's kind of a brief overview in terms of my early career, but I'd like to pause and see if you have any questions there.
No, this actually brings me up. Oh, sorry, brings me up to actually it brings me up to the employment aspect on AI. So interestingly, I know we were supposed to have this podcast, and yesterday actually I posted a LinkedIn post. Just FYI for the when will this get posted? It's basically October 10th, and I have a post where I'm just gonna pull up for myself so I can read it. So LinkedIn TechCrunch posted, and I took a screenshot that someone used AI and applied to around 2,800 jobs. Just to level set, I haven't done that.
Uh-huh.
And that's crazy. And he was basically, or she, they were applying to 17 jobs in an hour. Um, just want to put that level set that that's crazy. And we
Mhm.
know on the other side of the employer side, employment side, AI is heavily being used for screening, for ATS, whatever you want to call it, right? It's kind of like a lucky draw at this point, lottery, I would say. What are some real implications of AI when it comes to
Mhm.
employment in general? Because this is just crazy.
Yeah, so for one, I think that using AI to blast out that many resumes, even though they may be contextually very similar to the position that they're being applied to, you can still get a sense that a human didn't write it. And I think that we're getting better and better at reading text and blog articles and elsewhere and realizing this doesn't sound like it was written by a human. I do all the writing on my own. I may ask generative AI for some high-level concepts or definitions or whatever, but everything that I write is my own. That's why it comes across sometimes as kind of humor or snarky or whatever,
Mhm.
but I write everything myself. But I think from an employment perspective, that just having AI apply for tons of positions for you I don't think that that's really the best way to go because it's kind
Yeah.
of a quantity over quality aspect. So I still think that's the best approach is to do networking, get to know people, because there's going to be things about companies and positions that aren't posted online. So therefore, there's nothing for AI to read and understand and
Mm,
be able to add to your resume or cover letter and apply for it. So maybe I'm being a little old-fashioned, but I th still think that networking and understanding positions from that perspective is better.
yeah.
Plus, you're gaining those real human connections to help you now and in the future.
But how does one then like seeing how the current employment job market is? So I'll just give my medium hot take is I'm seeing a lot of PM content creators out there. They're like, the job market is great. It's not great. They're BSing it, and I see it. And
Mhm.
I'm seeing people who are employed and not unemployed or whatever you want to call it. I don't want to poo-poo them, right? But the market has been really impacted. And I am seeing many of them using AI in many different ways. Like I will tell you, number one bucket is contextual, right? As you mentioned.
Mhm.
So they're gonna take the description, copy paste it, done, or figure out a, keyword it. That's number one.
Yep.
So the genuineness is already gone. The second aspect is automating the whole flow, like a BDR or SDR perspective, reaching out to people on LinkedIn. They're literally leveraging that stuff. The
Mhm.
third aspect is cover letters you mentioned. I love those. They're a lot of work, but the job that you really want to have or love, I would actually go ahead that extra mile, right? But that's also becoming a mass saturated content creation as well.
Mhm.
How does an employer A navigates this? Because now you have a pool, a barrage of like 3, 4,000 applicants. How do you vet them? Like now everybody's best, right? So think of it. The ranking is always good now for all of them. How do you, I guess, pick from this noise the right
Mhm.
candidates to even interview?
Yeah, so from an employer's perspective, if they're getting thousands and thousands of resumes, the only thing that they really can do is use some kind of filtering on top of that. For decades, it was the ATS system, and now there
Hmm.
seems to be similar AI-based systems that will try and match the resume and cover letter up with the job itself. And also, I think that they may lean a little bit more on their personal contacts because why comb through all of these thousands of resumes
Yeah,
if they have some personal contacts that they already know, or they know somebody who knows somebody to bring them in for a phone screen or an interview. So I think that the other thing that people are struggling with is, yeah, the job market right now isn't great. But there's only so much that you can do. I don't think
yeah,
that it's a situation of just firing off more resumes is the solution because there may not be that many open positions. So, for example, there's the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's a government agency, and they actually have probably 12 or 15 or more different categories for jobs. You'll see things like hospitality and leisure and
yeah,
manufacturing, stuff like that. There's the information category, and that closely aligns with information technology, with dev positions, PM positions, customer support, web dev, stuff like that. So things that we would typically say are technical jobs, they're represented in that information category. That category has not seen much job growth over the past couple months. So it is difficult. But what I'm saying is that just because the job market is difficult, that doesn't mean that we should automatically default to just sending out thousands of resumes.
yeah,
I still think that it's building up your personal network, your personal
yeah,
connections, investing some time in your personal skills, some additional online training, that applies with your job, and just keep moving forward.
yeah.
So,
And I think one thing would be cool to add is like someone like myself, I do Substack, right? So I do podcasts and everything. I think many of those people should be doing leveraging these avenues to A, become a brand and also like showcase that you know what you know about because sometimes those things are behind the curtain. It's
yeah.
not that helpful.
Mhm.
But this allows me to segue into the ethical implications. So I'm switching gears a little bit, a bit further. Uh, when it comes to ethical implications, when it comes to, if you're an AI product manager, you're developing something. I'm seeing Microsoft hiring responsible AI titles. Some other companies are also doing the same thing. Since AI and its use case and its application to the real world application is fairly still new. A year or two is still fairly new, right?
Mhm.
Or some would argue 4 years, right? Because GPT wasn't out for that long. So how would you put this that what are the some ethical implications within these AI products that are going to be start building or they've already been built, they're being applied? Like, where do you see that?
Mhm. Yeah, so that area of AI ethics is very broad, and there's a number of different definitions. So the way that I would define it is it's the area where these AI models are actually interacting with humans, that there's a relationship there. And that includes at least looking at, the bias in the data. Of course, there's data security and privacy because you have yet some other model and process that's grabbing, personal information and processing it and making decisions based on that, whether it's for like mortgage approval applications or hiring decisions. And of course, related to that, there's, model explainability and also, trustworthiness and consistency. Can we trust this model to consistently make decisions that it was made to make? So,
Hmm.
for example, if we look at bias for a little bit, that's where, model was trained on data that doesn't represent the larger population that it will eventually serve. So if PM and data science are, working on a project together, whether it's for a typical AI project or even generative AI, they need to look at, are there biased patterns in that data? So, for example, I remember not too long ago, there was a generative AI that was producing images. And if you asked it to produce an image of a doctor, almost all the time it came up with men who were
Yeah,
doctors. And likewise, if you asked it to generate, an image of a woman, or excuse me, generate an image of a nurse, it would generate
all of a
an
sudden.
image of a woman. So that's bias that was baked into that data. And that bias can exist in supervised and unsupervised models, even for think about a year or two ago, that Apple credit card that it was giving
Yeah.
like 10 times more credit to men than to women. And this
Hmm.
was even happening for, husbands and wives. They referenced the same accounts. And in some cases, the wives had higher credit score, but it was still giving the husbands higher credit with their credit card. So there was
Yeah.
some kind of bias or something that was baked into that data. So overall, that's kind of how I look at, AI, ethics overall, and be on the lookout for that bias. Is the data really representative of that ultimate, customer population that's intending to serve?
You reminded me of Gemini. Gemini is, I don't want to go into politics, but I will say it was really off when you talk or you ask about the founding fathers spinning
Yeah.
up. It's not spinning up the reality. I accept that what they're doing is great, but it's not true. When you ask them about some other, historical character or historical, what would you call them? Like personalities, I would
Uh-huh.
say.
Yep.
It would really spin off people of different age, gender, race, and everything. And I'm like, okay, I see what you're doing. That's great. That's good. Not applicable precisely in this moment because you don't want to bosh the
Yep.
history of any country, of any tribe, or so forth. So I do understand that. But my question with that starts with then a little bit sub question. How does one make sure, like, what is the line of ethics? Like, what
Mhm.
is that benchmark that you're like, okay, this is the reality? Is it like in Gemini's case, hey, don't mess up with the history? Okay, don't do that. But if you're producing generic images about a nurse or a doctor, let's say, yeah,
Mhm.
it could be varied, depend on that. Who decides where the line is drawn?
Mhm.
Versus is it the individual institutions like Google itself is a megacorp? Do they decide? Or is there third-party AI regulations by the government that decide this is how you should be constructing? Keep the
Mhm.
history intact, or, I guess my question is, who does that? How do you do that?
Yeah, so that I'm not aware of any, governing body that will, look at specific generative AI responses or
Yeah,
images to make sure that they're, accurate. In a way, I think that we're that these models are really trying to provide a result that could be debated. Even among humans, I remember seeing a study a while ago that, humans only agree with each other about maybe 70% of the time. So even though this model is producing something, that doesn't mean that humans are always going to agree with that response, whether it's the text or the image or whatever. So for example, even when I ask the different generative AI models to write code for me that it compiles, it runs error free, it produces a result, but is that result really accurate? Is that what I was looking for and expecting? So I think that in large part that it's kind of the public opinion will help to drive more conciseness or accuracy in these models. So I don't think that there is, especially from an ethics point of view, that there's a baseline, test that I'm aware of. So
possibly like one thing could be is give the controls to the end user, whatever they
yeah,
wish, whatever they believe. So that way everybody is happy, but also like you're not messing up with reality, I guess. Or
yeah.
um
Yeah, yeah,
a
it
little
actually related to that, that you'll notice that there's a thumbs up and thumbs
yeah,
down for
yeah.
the text responses and even the images. And you can enter a reason why you gave it a thumbs down, for example. So there's been a few cases where I asked one of the generative AIs for some specific financial advice, and it was just plain wrong. So I gave it a thumbs down, and I provided a link to a reputable website saying this is really what should be in the response. So
No, no, no. I've actually used those and I do find them useful. I guess I'm like, let's give the user the control so there's
yeah.
no, there's no left, right leaning political. It's just like, hey, I want to use it this way. And so produce it for me in that way. Um, Shifting gears to another topic of ours, and probably it'll be a quick one, but explainable AI. And no pun intended, but can you explain me to
Yeah.
explainable AI?
I know it sounds
And
kind of odd.
what is it? Why is it trending? What's going on?
Yeah, so what's happening here is that data science will actually take the business case prepared by PM, and of course, PM works with the broader engineering team on that business case to justify the project.
Hmm.
And in there, PM and data science really need to determine, you know, is there a need for this model to be explainable? So
Hmm.
PM actually needs to work in some cases with the larger stakeholders within their company or their legal counsel to say, hey, we're developing a model to do X. Are there any laws or regulations that we have to provide explainability for how this model is processing the data and also providing that result so that PM can derive requirements from that, and that is what data science uses to actually build the model. So for example, if data science is limited to models that could be explained, that's going to reduce the number of models they have to choose from. So that's an important requirement for PM to discover and document early on.
Hmm.
So I see two broad categories with model explainability. One is just within the company itself, the
Hmm.
business stakeholders of the company. If, for example, if there's a model that is going to be interfacing with customers, like customer support, for example, there would probably be some review on that model to say, can this model reliably produce the same answers and consistently the same answers? And can we explain the model? Can data science explain to us, the business stakeholders, to ensure that the model will always produce, reliable, accurate answers in these areas? That's kind of explainability within a company that I would see. Another area that I see is explainability to meet external regulations and laws. So, for example, there's the EU GDPR, the General Data Protections. There's
Hmm.
like Article 15 and a few other articles in there. And they say something like, whenever the personal data is subjected to like data processing or an automated decision making, that the data subject, which in this case is the customer, that they can ask for a meaningful information about the logic involved with how their data was processed. So, and even for like medical devices, I remember seeing a couple of years ago that the FDA had about 170 or so AI-enabled medical devices. So these are devices that are actually implanted inside a human. So if
Hmm.
you had an AI-enabled medical device, wouldn't you want to know that it was making reliable, consistent, accurate decisions, and
Yeah.
that how it was generating those decisions was reviewed by some governing body like the FDA? So now these are just a couple of examples. I'm not providing legal advice, so your listeners will need to follow up with their legal counsel to
Yeah.
determine, we're going to build this model. Are there external regulations and laws that say we have to be able to explain it and why? And what does that explanation need to look like? Because those are going to be derived into requirements that data science is going to take into their thinking of, what do I have to choose from and how can I go about explaining this thing?
Do you think, um, just an example, it brings me up, the O1 model by GPT, right? It tells you how it's thinking, how's it deriving. Same with Perplexity Pro. It
Mhm.
asks, like, what am I searching? How am I deriving? Do you think that is going to be the ultimate way of understanding, hey, these are the sources I took, this is what I took, because you're building trust. In the end of the day, you're building trust with the end consumer, end user, end client, whatever you want to call it, right? Do you think that would be a minimal segue of explainable AI? Like, hey, this is how we derive, this is the law, this is the rule, this is how we took this data. Do you think that's the pathway?
Possibly. I know that there are different tools that will look at the model itself and the parameters in which it was
Yeah.
trained and be able to tell you how it went about making a decision. So, for example, if you're doing image classification, and let's say you're classifying images of a car, there are tools that will tell you, well, what are the major points or major parts of that image that led the model to classify it as a car? So, for
Hmm.
example, maybe it highlighted, two wheels in the windshield or something.
Yeah.
In terms of the model telling you how it's thinking or how it reached its decision, that I would be a little, I would question that because, currently we have issues with, model hallucinations.
Yeah.
Who's to say that the explanation isn't being hallucinated? I still think that there needs to be some external tool or ongoing human review to make sure that, what the model is producing is reliable and accurate. So that's kind of my first take on that.
Yeah. No, no, no. This makes sense. I was working for this one startup um 2 months ago, and we were trying to build the same thing. Was, hey, how do you explain the data to the account executive? Are you getting this? Where are you deriving it from? And while it's very interesting, but it's also challenging, it's like, are we being biased when we're explaining it? Is there some kind of, we're cutting corners? And so
Yeah.
I guess it's going to be a work in progress. Which brings me, as I mentioned, I worked on an AI product and I keep working on one on the side, hustles or whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
How does one, like, I maybe know the answer, but how does one gets into AI development? Let's say you're a product manager and you've been building dashboards all your 5, 6 years. It's a pretty big project. You want to get into an AI
Mhm.
product. How does one starts crawling, running, walking in this case, or I just got it wrong, by the way, it's crawl, walk, and run.
Mhm.
How does one get started?
Yeah, so that two questions there. One is, how do I, as a PM, let's say, who has no experience in AI, get into doing more AI product work? And then the other question is more along the lines of, when I'm managing an
Hmm.
overall program, what is a crawl, walk, run strategy for that program overall? So let me answer the personal career development question that because AI and ML are just huge areas, there's so many possibilities. I would pick one area that you are really passionate about and stick with it for about 6 months.
Hmm.
And I say an area. So an area could be something like starting off just with classification of text, sentiment analysis, topic modeling. It could be deriving, opinion mining, things like that. Just start off with something that you're passionate about and stick with it for 6 months. If you're interested in image and video processing, fine, pick that, stick with it for 6 months. If you're more into regression and forecasting, time series forecasting, fine. There's a bunch of classes and models out there that will help you understand how those models are prepared, and how they actually go about forecasting. The reason why I suggest that is that even though you're focusing on one area, that you're going to come across a lot of similar approaches that are going to be used in those other areas. So, for example, data cleaning, the quality of data, managing data pipelines, struggling with understanding the metrics of the model. How good is the model? How accurate is the model? And each model or set of models has different evaluation metrics. So you're actually going to struggle with, well, what is the best evaluation metric for this type of model that I'm working on? And even though you may prepare and create and
Hmm.
run a model, you'll get a result. Well, how does that result compare to like industry standard benchmarks for classification, like, sentiment analysis or whatever? So to personally get involved, that's what I would suggest is pick an area you're passionate about it, stick with it for 6 months, write your own code, train existing models, and just continue to work forward there. Publish your results, create a blog,
Yeah.
take classes, read books as needed, and also after that, look for opportunities at work to actually stretch your skills a little bit. So, for example, let me give you my personal example. Back in about 2014, 2015, when I was at Microsoft, they had a set of services, part of their cloud, the Azure cloud. And originally they were offering like sentiment analysis and key phrases as cloud services. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. And I was also learning Python at the time. So I chose to integrate with their cloud services and process some customer data. And I also worked with another BI on that. And we actually created a very early prototype system to analyze customer data and provide that to the business so that they could better understand, what customers were talking about, some of the issues that they were running into. So that was an interest I had. I worked on it on my own, and I said, we can kind of use this at work, within the constraints and policies at work. And then also when I was working at Amazon, I brought parts of that system over, although I figured out how to do, statistical key phrases and determine important themes. I retrained my own sentiment analysis model. We first had an early prototype on the warehouse deals team that I deployed, but also I deployed my models for Alexa Mobile. They ran those for several years. It actually helped them to find emerging issues like 50% faster than their prior methods that they were using. And over a period of time, it wound up helping about 880,000, customers over that period of time. So that's an example of taking something I was passionate about,
Yeah.
natural language processing, learning it on the side, saying, hey, we can use this at work, using it within the policies and standards at work to continue to grow that.
Yeah.
So I'll pause there on the personal side before I go into, a crawl, walk, run strategy for AI projects overall.
No, no, this is very to the point because I've done it myself. If I like something, I just do it on the side. And this is something that I can build a segue to at work. Definitely do it. Like there's only gain, there's no loss. So I
Yeah.
do agree with that strategy that you have. Um, I have a question about one thing, and this is outside of AI, I guess, or maybe kind of touches. It's going to more general PM role.
Mhm.
Or you know what? Let me just go back. Since we're talking about AI product managers right now, specifically, I wrote a blog about 10x PM.
Yeah.
And the idea around with that was just to give you more context. I found these tools, which I use them at work.
Mhm.
And they're like, before I had to learn how to write SQL. Now I actually don't have to do that. AI allows me to do that pretty good, like a good 9 out of 10. One I'm leaving out for human error, right? And so that's one.
Mhm.
You know, way I read reports, I summarize reports, user research, you can crazy stuff. Writing PRDs is now very easy. It can double, triple down on customer research, right? Talk to them, extract, have my Zooms spit out. Like, for example, my own podcast that I do, I actually apply a lot of AI tools. I have 11 labs producing where I don't have to record. I come up with the research and everything. I train my voice and I'm like, hey, create a audio format for that, right?
Okay.
So there's a lot of stuff that we can all do. What I mean by 10x AI PM is the amount of work that took me 30 hours a week, let's say, you know, house cleaning, let's say something. Now I can do that in maybe few hours.
Mhm.
And that allows me to sit more with the customer, think about the strategy, game up, level up, whether it's BI tool as well. What does it mean, according to you, what 10x PM would mean for being an AI, applied AI tools person, what does that looks for you? Or how do
Mhm.
you see that playing out? Is it the same way what I'm thinking, or you're like, no, man, it's a bit different?
Well, I see this kind of as three different levels, and that image of a funnel popped into my mind. So there's kind of this
Hmm.
broad middle area and a more focused area at the bottom. So for one, whenever we talk about 10xing something, 10xing the output, we really need to consider the receiving end, the consumer, who's the customer, the demand side for this, because even though we can automate and produce more, is it really
Hmm.
going to be consumed? Is it really going to be valued? So for example, even hypothetically, if PMs were to 10x their work today,
Hmm.
let's say that, PM was able to have two major releases a year. Okay.
Yeah,
If they 10x that, that's 20 major releases a year. Our customers really going to be able to understand and get up to speed and really evaluate those releases and be able to pick one. And that's just one PM. You
yeah,
consider even the broad number of PMs that are out there, 10xing their work, that's 10 times the number of products and features in the marketplace. And even if you think that, well, we'll just wrap marketing around it, well, that's 10x the kind of marketing that's taking place around this as well. So it
yeah,
just gets to be a lot more stuff to consider. And I think it makes it harder for the customer and the consumer to really understand, what do I really need and how do I find specifically what I'm looking for? There's just so much stuff. So for example, I remember that, there's even a majority of apps in various app stores that majority of them aren't even downloaded, or even I think it was last year for YouTube, there was something like 1.2 million hours of YouTube videos are uploaded every day. That's 1.2 million hours uploaded every
uh,
day. So who's going to consume all those videos? So, YouTube, they typically provide the videos that have the most number of views on them. So if you're just providing more stuff and they have very few views against them, how is it ever going to be discovered? So that's kind of my first take on 10xing anything, is to consider the demand or the consumption side. Um, the other thing to look at is it even possible to 10x a role? So are there any studies where AI is 10xing a role today? What does that look like? And there's a study that was done by the Boston Consulting Group. And at least one role, they looked at a subset of their consultants. And it was a controlled experiment. And what they found, they were using GPT-4, and that they found that they were able to complete their tasks about 25% more quickly and with
hmm.
higher quality results. And they also, I think, did this with some legal work and found some interesting results there as well. So we don't know from those studies if that increase in performance for consultants will also apply to PM work. But the thing to think about, though, is um, this study had said that the lower and medium performing consultants had actually improved their performance much greater by using AI than their higher performing consultants. So in this case, AI was acting as kind of as a leveler where you had more people who are performing at a much higher level. And I think that that's very, very positive and promising. So it seems like initially there is the possibility of 10xing PM work, just looking at studies for other roles. And then just one last point that if we think about 10xing a role like PM, that to me, whenever I read blog articles about this, they immediately go for the individual tools. So they're
Yeah,
saying, yeah, you can use these tools to create for a PM to create presentations, and PM can 10x their work by using this separate tool to take meeting notes and action items and send them out an
yeah,
email. And PM can use this other tool to create, customer surveys or to create mock-ups and
yeah.
stuff like that. But the visual that pops in my head is kind of like this hub and spoke. That PM in that
Mm,
case is a hub, and each spoke is the coordination of those separate tools. That's a separate coordination. All those tools are separate from one another. So therefore, you still have, PM in this case as the center of that hub, trying to coordinate, to prompt and coordinate, and really to bring all that stuff together. I don't think that we're going to be able to 10x PM or 10x any role if there's these separate tools that all need to be coordinated differently. And one last point is that, PM doesn't do all this work in a vacuum. We rely on a lot of very talented people around us. The
mhm.
people whom we rely on, dev, data scientists, you have marketing, customer support, operations, you name it, they're going to need to 10x their work as well. So I think that it's not just 10x and PM work, but it's having a better experience across all these disparate tools and determining how can the other rules that PM works with, how can they also 10x their work? So does that make sense overall or?
I like what you're saying. That is very true because though I wrote the article about the tools that you can 10x, I guess the point that it comes to is like it's not the output uh for the ultimate product that you're building impacts. The output of PM impacts, meaning an example for that is there was a time when I was required to learn SQL at my job.
Mhm.
So I was like going through these classes. Think about this, 8 hour work,
Yeah.
2 hours of this class, 3 times a week. And I'm like, oh my God, I was tired. But I learned it now when I look at these roles popping up. Oh, you should know SQL. I'm like, should you? Should you know that? It's a very interesting question, right? Or they're like, oh, you should write great PRDs. I'm like, should you? Because now all that you should write this, you should know SQL, that could be very well offloaded for a tool. Let even take GPT for a
Mhm.
second, right? Only one tool. Maybe, so to your point, I do agree. It does not mean producing 10 features, but possibly 10x could mean is producing two features, but they're so damn good
Mhm.
because the PM was able to isolate their focus. They have more time talking to customers.
Yep.
And the reason I'm thinking about that, about the 10x part, is like I had a PM who would write novels. And not to be rude, it was literally a 10-page PRD. I've never
Mhm.
read that. I'd rather read a book, and I don't love reading book. So that's what is it, right? So I'm thinking, do you think that's the segue for PMs? Is like 10x performance for individual PM. So if you're mid-tier, to your point, good, level up. If you're already good PM, you become really, really good PM. So that means you
Mhm.
focus more on customer and you produce good features. Does that
Yep.
mean that's the route?
Possibly, yeah. So I actually see two different perspectives on your answer. That one, the specific skills where the
Yeah.
PM jobs say, you have to be able to write SQL and blah, blah, blah. I think that employers are going to start looking more for people who know or PMs who know how to use generative AI to write that SQL for them. And
Yeah.
as long as they know enough about SQL and can verify that, yeah, this query I got back is going to give me what I want. Because like I
Mhm.
mentioned earlier, that I had one of the generative AI tools generate some Python code. Sure, it worked
Yeah.
error-free, but it didn't give me the correct answer. So it's going to
Yep.
be the same thing. I think we're going to need to understand just enough about the output to make sure that, yeah, this is going to give me what I want. And the other aspect around writing, product requirements, it's understanding, well, what does a good product requirement look like? Is it implementation independent? Is it measurable? Things like that. Yeah, you can have generative AI generate a whole list of those for you, but you're still going to need, a real human with an understanding of what good product requirements is to say, yeah, these 8 are really good, but these other 2 I'm going to have to adjust and tweak here because the generative AI didn't produce, very good requirements in that case. So I do like the aspect of generative AI being able to handle more of those details, and humans may move into kind of like more of an audit role and oversight role and be able to kind of verify that work rather than doing all the drudgery themselves. So,
No, no, and that brings me to, just want to be sensitive to times. That brings me to my last question. Everybody is hiring. Like, I will literally open jobs right now. I'll just literally do that right now on LinkedIn. I'm just gonna go ahead. Jeez, literally, it's hilarious. So there's a company I will not name, but they're hiring a principal product manager, comma, AI. There are actually three roles that I see. AI product manager. Is there a career path there? Correct. And I will load with this. You know how Jira, Slack, ClickUp, you pick all these tools, they're part of a PM life, part of
mhm,
anyone's life,
yeah,
right? It's agnostic. Everybody uses it.
mhm,
Do you really need to call AI product manager? Because applied AI will be agnostic across all industries. PM will be using it. You would be expected to use these tools. If you're not, you're probably living under a rock at this point.
mhm.
Is a AI product manager career path, or do you think this is just a short term, this is gonna eliminate and this will be expected?
Yeah, no, I would say that it is a unique skill set that when you build upon kind of the foundational PM skills, which I would say are, good project management skills, being able to understand and identify risks, being able to, express customer empathy to really understand what customer true needs are, both stated and unstated, and also being able to clearly articulate that in a business plan. All that I mentioned so far is kind of typical PM work. What happens beyond that is the discussions with data science to determine, do we really need an AI model to meet this opportunity to provide this customer benefit? Because if you don't need AI or any model, you can actually get to market much more quickly, and your release is going to have less risk associated with it. Because when you're adding AI or any model to your release, you're actually adding risk and variability. And the reason why is that as you seek to train and evaluate these models, the model is trying to learn and it's
Hmm.
trying to understand and it's trying to identify patterns in the data itself. So there is an extra skill set for AI PMs to work with data science and to understand enough about the different types of models, pros and cons. How do we determine, bias in the data? Where do we even get the data from? Do we have the right licensing to even use that data in our
Yeah.
commercial products, for example? So I think that an AI PM is like regular PM work, plus this extra expertise built on top of it. Like I mentioned, for those additional skills, understanding enough about the different models, the areas, understanding the terminology and the risks inherent in it, and also another area that isn't discussed much is the surrounding infrastructure around these models. That
Mm.
everybody loves to talk about the models and the math and everything. Yeah, that's important, but we have the surrounding infrastructure, like the data pipelines coming into the model will actually affect the quality of the model itself. There's management and monitoring around the model. There very well could be ongoing auditing of the model results to ensure that even after it's deployed to production, it will continue to produce high quality results with unseen data in the future. So that's a thing called model drift that you want to look for. So there is additional work for an AI PM to consider beyond, what they would normally do for a traditional software development project. And those are just some areas we can talk more about any of those if you like.
No, this I guess one thing would be like, so what you're saying is like, there are two things. One is that AI would be expected for PM to be using it.
Mhm.
But the AI trajectory of product managers that we are looking for is just like more. I've been a data PM, right? So everybody uses data, but like, hey, how do you leverage third-party data? How do you enrich the data? What are some
Mhm.
segmentation tools? The same thing with AI product managers. You're saying not only understanding foundation models, but understanding the math, understanding what are you using? Do you have the licensing? What is it when you stop actually using something for
Mhm.
the data, whether it's first party, it's second party, third party, right? And so that's actually very good. I asked you that because I think a lot of people think of AI product managers. Uh, I don't know, maybe I could be wrong. At least from what I'm seeing is like using Gen AI tools, applying Gen AI
Yeah.
tools, applied AI product management. And I'm like, that will be agnostic.
Yep.
Everybody will be using. You see it literally splattered everywhere, actually, at
Yep.
this point. I know we're at the last few minutes, so just want to focus on one thing I always ask all my guests, Craig, is something and hopefully, I guess the job market right now sucks. Um, People are trying to network. I know 10 folks who reached out to me this last past week asking for advice, and I'm like, I don't know, the same thing you said. Network, try to reach. And then I'm like, I don't know what else to do. There's not much. What would you say is
Mhm.
what PMs can do? Because I've seen PMs being getting offers, job offers, and then they get taken away.
Mhm.
This happened with me actually earlier this year as well.
Okay.
We have seen PMs being brutally impacted, and nobody talks about it. Everybody talks about the job market is good, it's picking up, it's pretty quiet, crickets chirping, almost a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, what would you say? Like, I don't even know. I don't even have a question for you at this point. I'm
Uh-huh.
like, Greg, maybe you know something that I don't know.
Yeah. So what I would say to that is um, focus on what's in your realm of control. I think that if people are, overly concerned about the job market in general. That's something that none of us can control. We can't control the state of the economy or where they're doing layoffs or for how long or any of that. So I think it helps to look at, well, what can I control?
Mhm.
What can I do to further my career today? And there's a bunch of, free options. That doesn't mean that you always have to sign up for a paid class or any of that. But I would find ways to stay involved in your career. As a PM, look for opportunities to execute and to exhibit your PM skills. Whether that is finding free classes online and developing your own models, for example, if you wanted to move more into AI PM or even traditional PM work, if there's some areas where you can improve on, I would look for opportunities to do that. Also, you might consider doing volunteer work. That there are
Mhm.
organizations that need, different help with project management and program management, for example, to build schedules and releases, or to even to evaluate products. I did evaluations for nonprofits a while ago. It was very rewarding. But that's kind of typical PM work, which is, okay, we decided to use a third-party product, but what's the best one? It's going
Yeah.
back to the customer needs. Well, what's the budget? What's our ultimate need? Licensing, all that kind of stuff. So I'd say to look for opportunities to continue to demonstrate and to exercise your PM skills because over time, those skills could get a little rusty if you're not using them. And the other benefit for volunteering work is that it can kind of feel like a regular work or corporate environment because you're collaborating and working with different people in different disciplines. You're understanding what their customer needs are and things like that. So I wouldn't stress out about trying to do everything within your realm of control, but pick one or
Mm.
two things. I'm going to learn about X for the next week or two, and I'm going to publish a blog and maybe publish something on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Or, I'm going to find one or two nonprofits that really need help in an area that aligns with program or project management, for example. And I would kind of go that way. And those other things outside of our control, job market, whatever,
Yeah.
I wouldn't worry about those. And of course, parallel with that, continue to network as well. So
No, this is I think you missed one more thing. It's also you can reach out to Craig.
yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Not that you're advertising yourself, but I think seeing your career personally, I think people should reach out to you. It would definitely be helpful for those who are in this market. It's
Mhm.
not only the job. I think there are other things that comes with the job that gets also impacted financially, career-wise. You don't know what am I jumping into. There are multiple things, and I think having that segue that there's someone there who can guide you, mentor you, figure out with
Mhm.
your projects, or even companies who are trying to figure out to hire the right people. But to that note, thank you, Craig, for joining the podcast. This podcast, I feel very good about it because I
Okay.
think it took out a lot of meat, or not a lot of meat, but like we discussed a lot of high density, deeper conversation that
Yeah,
people need to have. So thank you for that time.
absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate your time. So.
Thank you.